All right, thank you, Miriam. Again, it's a great pleasure to participate in this event. When we look at the state of the world today, at our multifaceted global crisis, what is most evident is that none of our major problems, energy, environment, the climate emergency, economic inequality, and now the COVID pandemic, none of these problems can be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they're all interconnected and interdependent. To understand and solve them, we need to learn how to think systemically in terms of relationships, of patterns, in terms of context. Indeed, such a systemic understanding of life has recently emerged at the forefront of science. Over the last 4 decades, I have developed a synthesis of this new understanding of life, which I call the systems view of life. It is formulated in terms of concepts derived from complexity theory, which was developed in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, you will appreciate that such a synthesis involves quite a few technical terms, but recently I have found a completely non-technical way of summarizing it. And I do so in terms of 4 characteristics of life that constitute its very essence and can be observed at all levels of complexity, from the smallest bacteria through the wide range of plants, animals, to human beings, societies, and ecosystems. These 4 characteristics, which are embodied in all forms of life, are the following. The first, life organizes itself in networks. This actually contains 2 ideas. The first is that the network is the basic pattern of organization of all living systems. Wherever we see life, we see networks. And the second idea is that life organizes itself, which means that the network pattern is not imposed on an organism, but is developed by the system itself. The second characteristic is that life is inherently regenerative. Now, the continual regeneration of life in nature is ancient knowledge. You just have to think of the turn of the seasons with new growth in every spring. What is new in the systems view is the realization that regeneration operates at all levels of life, down to the molecular networks in cells. Regeneration is the very essence of life's self-organization. When regeneration stops, life stops. The third characteristic is that life is inherently creative. This is really something radically new that scientists did not understand until recently. I'm talking about a certain process known as emergence, the spontaneous emergence of new order at critical points of instability. This is a characteristic of all living systems, and it represents the creativity inherent in life. So we are not just creative because we may be artists or designers or creative people of some other kind. We are not creative because we are human. We are creative because we are alive, because life itself is creative. And finally, my fourth characteristic is that life is inherently intelligent. This refers to a new concept of cognition, or if you wish, of mind, that emerged in the last few decades. This is a complex new concept, and I will try to summarize it briefly. When a living organism interacts with its environment, this interaction is not an automatic response, but is directed by the system itself according to its nature and its past experience. Another way of describing the situation is that living organisms at all levels of complexity interact with their environment through sensory organs. To use an old philosophical term, they are sentient beings. In the system's view, these sentient interactions are identified as cognitive interactions, and their study has blossomed into a rich multidisciplinary field known as cognitive science. So, to repeat again, life organizes itself in networks, and these networks are inherently regenerative, creative, and intelligent. Each of these four characteristics of life is a radical discovery, and all are full of important consequences for planetary well-being. A detailed systemic analysis of our global crisis reveals that at the deepest level, it is caused by the arrogant view that humans are fundamentally separate from nature and somehow superior to the rest of nature, and that nature is nothing more than a resource to be exploited and managed for human benefit. This has led to a global economic system based on the illusion of perpetual economic growth, measured by growth of the GDP, regardless of whether real value is created or destroyed in the process. In this way, money, rather than the well-being of people and the community of life, has become the dominant goal in the global economy. In this economic system, perpetual growth is pursued continually and relentlessly by promoting excessive consumption and a throwaway economy that is energy intensive, generates waste and pollution, depletes the Earth's natural resources, increases economic inequality, and drives the climate crisis. If we are to shift our current trajectory toward one that enhances rather than diminishes planetary well-being, we need to transform the foundations of our cultural and economic systems. We must move to a civilization based on regeneration rather than extraction, an ecological civilization, as it is sometimes called. Such an ecological civilization would mirror the four fundamental characteristics of life. It would be organized in networks, and it would be regenerative, creative, and intelligent. At the heart of the transformation required for an ecological civilization, we find a new ethical foundation. Now, ethics is usually mentioned in the context of religion or philosophy, but there's also a scientific approach to ethics. When we study the history of evolution, we come to realize that nature sustains life by creating and nurturing communities. As soon as the first cells appeared on Earth, they formed tightly interlinked communities known as bacterial colonies. And through the long history of evolution, nature has created and sustained communities at all levels of life. Now, natural selection favors those communities in which the individual members act for the benefit of the community as a whole. And since all the others were eliminated by natural selection, this is what we see in nature. At the human level, we call this ethical behavior. So ethics is always related to community. It is behavior for the common good. In today's world, we all belong to many communities, but we all share two communities to which we belong. We are members of humanity, and we are members of the global biosphere, the community of life. We are members of oikos, Greek word which is the root of ecology and means household. And as such, we should behave like the other members of the Earth household behave. The plants, animals, microorganisms that form the vast network that we call the web of life. The outstanding characteristic of the biosphere is that it has sustained life for billions of years. As members of the global community of living beings, it behooves us to behave in such a way that we don't interfere with nature's inherent ability to sustain life. This, of course, is the very essence of ecological sustainability. Now, as members of the human community, our behavior should reflect a respect for human dignity and human rights. And since human life encompasses biological, cognitive, social, and cultural dimensions, human rights should be respected in all these dimensions. To lay this out in detail is quite a challenge, but fortunately, we have this magnificent document, the Earth Charter, which covers a broad range of human dignity and human rights. As you know, the Earth Charter is a declaration of 16 values and principles for building a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. It is a systemic vision recognizing the interdependence of our global problems and providing a broad ethical framework for appropriate systemic solutions. The Earth Charter was first published over 20 years ago, and reading it today, we can see that it is still fully valid. It is really a magnificent summary of the kind of ethics we need for planetary well-being. Thank you for your attention.